name is Eva, and here at The Charm of It, I love celebrating the lighter side of board games. I prefer games that fit into my life instead of requiring me to fit my life around them, and hopefully my reviews will help you decide if a game is the right fit for your life or not. To that end, I like to talk about what makes a game fun to play and then what makes it effortless or not to play. I don't go into the rules explanations of games just due to time constraints. However, I always include a link down below to a rule or how to play video in case you want to hear more of the specifics of the game before deciding whether or not to buy it. Today, I'm reviewing Evolution: The Beginning, and that part is key because there's also a regular Evolution game, which I'll talk about at some point, but that is not today. So this is from North Star Games. It's ages 8 and up. It plays 2 to 5 players. And playtime is supposed to be around 30 minutes. I think Evolution: The Beginning is an incredibly fun game to play for all kinds of reasons. First of all, you are definitely going to interact with your fellow players whenever you're playing this game. Each of you is evolving animals who all eat out of a common watering hole, and you can evolve your animals into carnivores, which means that instead of eating out of the watering hole, they eat the other animals that other players are building. And in turn, there are various defenses that the herbivores can play in order to defend themselves. And because of that, you are definitely going to want to look at what types of animals other players are making when you're deciding how your animals are going to evolve. And basically, the whole point of the game is to react to what other players are doing. So there's a lot of interaction going on, which I really enjoy. Not only is Evolution: The Beginning really fun in that you get to interact with other players, but it's also incredibly satisfying to create your own animals, of course. Each of them can have up to 3 traits, and you can also expand their population, and it's just so fun to have this variety of animals in front of you. I always kind of imagine what those traits would look like in an actual animal. You can name them, and I just find it utterly delightful that not only are you interacting with other players, but you're also just making something in front of you that's really satisfying. I find that overall Evolution: The Beginning is quite well balanced because there are several different trait cards related to either carnivores eating other animals or those animals adding more defenses to save themselves from the carnivores. That aspect of the game is well balanced. And there are also several other ways that animals can become specialized eaters and get more food. They don't have to be carnivores. And so different players are going to end up pursuing different strategies, and any one of those could be successful. There are definitely multiple routes to victory in this game, and there aren't any cards that are so powerful that you can't counteract them in some way, which I really like. I think it makes for a more level playing field. That being said, there can be an issue where about halfway through the game, if one player is doing much better than the others, it does start to feel as if you can't necessarily catch up with that player because there's only so much you can do to increase how much you're eating in the round. I haven't necessarily experienced this, but other people that I've played with have. So I don't think it's a runaway leader problem, but there is definitely a sense that if you're doing really successfully, you might not necessarily be caught. However, if the other players gang up and drive a species to extinction that was being really successful for a certain player, that can change the game mid-course. So things can turn in just a couple of rounds in this game, which I think really increases the level of balance in it. I do find that Evolution: The Beginning has quite a bit of variability. Now, that's not in the components. There are only a few trait cards, so you're going to see them every game, and everything else you'll have been familiar with from the very beginning. However, strategy, that varies quite widely from game to game. Even though you'll probably see those trait cards come out, they aren't necessarily going to be in your hand. They might be in your opponent's hand. So depending on what cards you draw, that's going to influence what kind of animals you're going to make. The goal in this game is always to get as many food tokens as possible, so you're really driven to create animals that eat the most in every turn. And there are several different ways to make these kinds of animals, and so I have found that each game, the kinds of animals that are on the table are a little bit different. And of course, since in so many ways you evolve your species in reaction to the other player's species, there's a lot of variability there. So a strategy that has worked really well for me in one game I haven't been able to pursue it all in the next game, so I have to develop an entirely new strategy. So there's definitely strategic variability there. This is a lighter game, so it's not as if you're playing an entirely new game each time you sit down, but I'm never bored, and I love watching how the different animals develop. I'm really impressed with the pacing of Evolution: The Beginning. It starts off a little bit more slowly because you don't have many cards to play, so the first couple of rounds you're just kind of waiting for the right traits, but it picks up steam quite quickly, and then it maintains its tension and interest level throughout. Pretty much as soon as there's a carnivore on the table, all the players stay very alert, which is really fun. I find that the lengths of the game are generally great. They stop when I'm still interested. There's no dragging out, but there's also enough time within that to do interesting things with my animals, evolve them, maybe try out a few different strategies. And overall, it's just a really good time. I will say that as a 2-player game, I don't think I've ever finished in exactly 30 minutes. It tends to be more like a 40-45 minute game for me, but it's interesting that whole time, so I don't mind that. The other thing that's intriguing about this one is that the scoring is done with food tokens that you hide in your food bag, and so you have no way of glancing at a score sheet and knowing who's ahead and who's behind. That can sort of affect pacing in both good and bad ways. In a good way, you don't feel discouraged because you can see that you're 30 points behind the other players, so that can be really nice, especially in a family game. However, on kind of the trickier side, if you think you have a winning strategy, you're not actually sure how well that strategy is doing until the end of the game when everyone adds up their food tokens. So there is this element of mystery that has both positives and negatives, but is different from some of the other games I play, so I thought I would mention it. Evolution: The Beginning is an absolutely gorgeous game. The level of attention to detail and the variability that went into this just boggles my mind, especially since it retails for around $20. Not only do you get cards with really adorable, beautiful artwork on them, and, I'm just going to keep drawing Nocturnal. Here's some lovely little eggs. Here's the Fat Tushy one. I love them all. And the backs of these cards also, this doesn't affect gameplay, it's just aesthetics. The little creature moving around the water hole is closer or further away, just depending on the backs of the cards, which I think is just such a lovely touch. So not only do you get those beautiful cards that have different artwork on both the fronts and the backs, you also get 5 of these little silk screened bags that each have artwork from the cards on them. Here are a couple. So those are lovely. The watering hole is this absolutely beautiful watercolor picture that sits in the middle of the table, looking stunning. And finally, the food tokens themselves, I don't know why I'm leaning, sorry, they don't all have different, but there are 4 or 5 different varieties of plants. And once again, that's not because of gameplay, that's just for pure aesthetic celebration, really. This game is definitely a delight for the eyes, and a major part of why I love to play it is looking at all those cards and food tokens and everything just sitting on the table. It's a beautiful game. In addition to being wonderful fun to play, Evolution: The Beginning is a really effortless game to play, which I love because it means that it gets pulled out more frequently. First of all, it has a really quick setup time. You just have to shuffle the cards, put that watering hole in the center of the table, and either have the food tokens in a bag or a bowl or somewhere easily accessible. You don't even have to deal any cards to begin with. Each player draws cards that they need on their turn. So setup is definitely just a minute or 2, which is great. It does require a fair amount of table space because you're laying out cards for each of your new species. You do need to have enough space for all those species. I've had up to 7 or 8 species at once. And so I have played it on the coffee table, but only as a 2-player game, and space does get tight. My coffee table is quite small. Any kind of regular kitchen table could work as long as each player has, a certain amount of space to lay out their cards. So this isn't the most portable game, even though the amount of elements are quite small, so you could carry it from that perspective. But the table space required just makes it more of a play-at-home or on the kitchen table type game. But setup is really quick, and putting everything away at the end is also very quick. So overall, I find the logistics are definitely good. Evolution in the Beginning really shines at having simple rules that provide for interesting yet fun and light strategic play. This is actually a more simplified version of the game Evolution, and so the designers created this game in order to be more accessible to people who don't have a lot of board game experience, or people who just want a shorter, less strategic game, or maybe people who want to play with their kids. And they did an absolutely wonderful job simplifying those rules. The rule book is really clear and easy to read. Every player has their own separate turn and they follow the same amount of steps. And so it only takes 1 or 2 rounds for everyone to become really familiar with what they need to be doing. And the rules start to become quite intuitive. What's nice is that you can play as many or as few cards as you want, and those cards can be played in multiple ways. So there is a lot of scope for individual players to make decisions, and all the rules feel like they really enhance the game and they're easy to remember. I have not had to refer to the rule book since the first time I played, which is really great. And this is also an easy game to teach to new players because the basic mechanics of how you play are so nice and streamlined. So from a rules perspective, I think that Evolution in the Beginning could easily be your very first modern board game, and everyone in the family would get the rules quite quickly. Finally, I like to talk about where a game falls on the mental effort scale. And for me, Evolution in the Beginning is definitely a weeknight game. Even though there are certainly strategic decisions to be made with how you're going to use your cards and how you want your animals to adapt, overall it feels quite lighthearted, and you can just kind of play round to round. You don't need to make a lot of big plans for future turns because you're reacting to what other players have done. So there's really only so much you can plan ahead. I definitely find games require less mental effort the less forward planning I have to do. Of course, your brain might work in a different way. I think that this is such a fun game, and what's interesting about it is that it's actually most strategic at 2 players, which is the count I've usually played it at, and it becomes less strategic as you add more players, which I think makes it really good for a family game because that means that if you're playing with 4 or 5 people, it's going to be more accessible and simpler to play, which is really what you want when you're just kind of getting your family together after dinner around the game table, and maybe people of different ages or different abilities. So overall, as I said, for me, this is definitely a weeknight game. That short playtime and the really fun, engaging, but not overly complex game mechanics make it that I can play it even if I'm tired and am not capable of making really deep decisions. For all those reasons, I highly recommend Evolution in the Beginning. If you are looking for an absolutely beautiful game that will look wonderful on your table but is easy to set up and tear down, if you're looking for a game that lets players make interesting choices but also doesn't require a lot of forward planning or deep decision that might result in brain burn, and if you're looking for a game that works on a variety of levels, then I think that this is an absolutely wonderful choice. I think it's a great value. I bought it for I think around $18 from Target. I love that it's available at easily accessible stores, so even if you don't have a local game store nearby, you can probably find this one. The one caveat that I would give is that, as I mentioned, carnivores do eat other animals, and they can drive them into extinction, or they can just eat 1 or 2 of their population. And you can eat your own animals if you don't want to prey on other players, but most of the time you're going to be eating other players' animals. So if you know that your family might be upset by that, then that could be the only reason why I wouldn't recommend it. Otherwise, I think it is an absolutely beautifully designed, beautifully published game that is just such a joy to get to the table. And I have, in fact, played this with my 12-year-old niece, who is an animal lover, and she really enjoyed it so much that she spent her own money on the bigger, more complicated version of the game because she wanted to see how that played. So this game did go over really well with her, although she is always deeply offended when I eat her animals as a carnivore, and she herself prefers to play with no carnivores at all. But other than that, I've played it with other adults and always had a really good time. So this is one that I'm so happy that I have on my shelf, and when I'm looking for a game that's light but interesting, then I will always play this one. Until next time, happy gaming, and I hope this review was helpful. If you'd like to follow me on Instagram, I am the charm of it over there, as well as on Board Game Geek.